Hello and welcome back to Inside the Vault, episode number 16, a Carolina Panthers podcast. I am your host, Ryan Smith, and this podcast is brought to you by the Keep Pounding Podcast Network. Follow them on Twitter at KPPounding_FSSN. And this podcast is powered by the Fans First Sports Network. Follow them on Twitter at Fans First SN. You can also rate and subscribe to the Tobacco Road Sports Radio YouTube channel at youtube.com/Tobacco Radio. Well, my latest guest here on Inside the Vault, looking forward to having him on. He is a play-by-play broadcaster for college football and college baseball for the SEC Network. He also hosts the radio voice for major championships for golf. And finally, you might have seen him on preseason football with your Carolina Panthers and our legendary player, Steve Smith. He does the play-by-play. He is Taylor Zarzour. Taylor, how's it going?
It's great, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's so good to have you on. Let's just jump right in. On a lighthearted note to start, you do the play-by-play with the Panthers during the preseason games with Steve Smith. How is it like working with Steve? I've wanted to know. That's the first question I got to ask.
Well, he's one of my best friends, and has been for a long time. We did a radio show in Charlotte the last couple of years that he played for the Panthers, and we became very close friends through that experience. And getting to work with him and call these games was really a dream come true. Once he went to the Ravens, we stayed in touch and we're still friends, but we didn't get to see each other that often. We didn't get to work with each other that often. So we went 7-8 years between really spending a considerable amount of time together. And for the last 3 years, it's been just like nothing ever changed. So he really is like a brother to me, and I to him. We both have confided in each other in a lot of things in our lives. So that's been great. But what we do on the air is no different than what we do off the air. We have just a tremendous amount of fun together.
Yeah. Well, we won't get into the college football, SEC Network, or golf today. This is a Panthers podcast. Let's get into specifically the Panthers portion. Obviously not the brightest start for the Panthers at 0-6 to start the season. Panthers were on the bye this past week and will come off the bye against the Houston Texans, a very winnable game. To start, if you can just summarize in a few words, what has the Panther season been like?
Hard. It's been, they're missing a lot of pieces, especially on the offensive line. At the skill positions. I don't think that this team is anywhere near complete on offense. Have a lot of frustration with injuries, especially in the back end. I think it's incredibly frustrating. Just as an example, what's happened with J.C. Horn's career.
Yeah,
I do SEC football, as you said, and I have done a lot of South Carolina games. In fact, as you're talking to me right now, I've just done 2 weeks in a row of South Carolina games. And he was an incredible shutdown corner in college. They never threw his way. And I thought that he would have a terrific professional career. Maybe he still will. But when you take a top 10 draft pick and the guy plays in less than 25% of your games every year he's in the NFL, that's hard to overcome when you spend a first-round pick on someone like that. You've got a guy the next year that you draft, an Ike Ekwonu, who's learning how to play that position at the professional level and is having some ups and downs with it. I think partially because the pieces around him aren't totally in place yet, especially from guard to guard. And, you have that. You've got you trade away your best receiver in order to get who you think is going to be your franchise quarterback and who I still believe is going to be their franchise quarterback. But because you trade that away, you don't really have a guy that is feared by opposing defenses at the receiver position. You've got a great possession receiver who's a great leader, but you don't have anybody that can blow the top off the defense. A running back that hasn't been healthy, coming from the Super Bowl runner-up. I mean, you put all that together, and it's going to be hard. So I know you asked for a few words. I give you one word. It's hard,
Hard,
but I felt like it needed an explanation
of
for
course.
why it's been hard.
Yeah. And we'll get into some of the meat here in a little bit. And as Panther fans know, this game, Carolina versus Houston on Sunday, features number 1 pick Bryce Young versus number 2 pick CJ Stroud. Fans have been obsessing over how good Stroud looks at 3-3 for the Texans, equaling their win total from last season. And the Panthers obviously at 0-6, like we said. So, Taylor, you've been around the team. I know you're familiar. Let's set the record straight. Is CJ and Bryce, I mean, I know this and you know this, but let's set the record straight. Is it two different situations, apples and oranges, or is there a main reason why Stroud really is looking better?
I think that the Texans don't have as many issues as the Panthers currently do, and certainly that's a factor. I will tell you, this is something that I debated with a lot of friends in the business calling SEC football the last couple of years, and being a fan or just an admirer from afar of CJ Stroud is what would the team that had the first pick ultimately do? And as somebody that covered a lot of Bryce Young's games, I think that he is an exceptional leader and somebody that is going to be a sponge in the locker room and in the film room and has a lot of talent. But he's also in a situation where you've got a guy in Frank Reich who I think by his own admission hasn't called the plays perfectly, which is why he's giving up that responsibility.
Yeah.
You've got a guy in Bryce Young who's got a lot of issues around him, and CJ Stroud has a team that has a little bit more of shape to it than the Panthers do at this moment. Having said all of that, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Panthers beat the Texans on Sunday. If you look forward in their schedule, Ryan, to the next month plus,
I've been saying this. Yeah.
It really wouldn't surprise me if the Panthers reel off a few wins. I'm not saying they're going to get back in the division race or the playoff race or anything like that. But by the end of the year, if this team has 5 or 6 wins, it really wouldn't surprise that pick.
Yeah.
You know, that pick is going to the Chicago Bears. So I think the more wins the Panthers can get, the better for their future. And I know that fans are so frustrated and tired of having losing seasons in the Tepper era. And I assure you that he and his wife are very tired of it too. But I think for the first time, if the Panthers can go and win in, let's say in the last 11 games, if they finish somewhere around 5-6 or 6-5, I think that's something to build on going into next season. And it really wouldn't surprise me. I tell you, I know that the second half didn't look so good against the Dolphins, but that first quarter, I mean, you saw what Bryce Young is capable of in that first quarter. And I think he got a little momentum from that going into this game.
Yeah. Speaking of bright spots, who are some players that have stood out to you through these 6 games? We've mentioned Bryce, we've mentioned Adam Thielen. Who are some of those guys that have stood out to you?
Yeah, I would say a few. Hey, I think that Hayden Hurst is going to be a really good leader at the tight end position. He's obviously, it's been hard to get any receiver the football. Adam Thielen is up in age, and I don't know what his future is going to hold in terms of how many years he's going to play for the Panthers, but you need that kind of leader in a locker room, and no matter what your record is. Andy Dalton as a backup quarterback is like another coach to Bryce Young, and I'm sure for the rest of his life, Bryce is going to be so thankful for him. I'm starting to see signs that Derek Brown is really pushing around offensive linemen. He's another guy. I did a lot of his games in college, and I thought that he would immediately turn into a big-time player. It's taken him more time than I thought. Kame Grugier-Hill is a wrecking ball in the middle of that defense.
Yeah,
great special teams player, but he's a great tackler. So he's another one that I've enjoyed seeing so far. Laviska Shenault in the not only in special teams, but also as a guy that's kind of a catch-all as a running back and a receiver. I like having him as a weapon in many different ways. So there are a few guys to point at. But I would say, I mean, I knew that the beginning of the season was going to be hard because of the schedule, but it's gone a lot harder than I think anyone imagined, which is why suddenly you see a play that's pretty significant that, through 6 weeks of the season, you'd make a play calling change as they have. And I keep referencing all these guys that I've known for a while. Thomas Brown's another SEC guy that
Georgia guy.
I've known for quite some time, and I'm fascinated to see what it's going to be like with him calling the plays.
Yeah, I think a lot of fans are as well. Now switching gears, things that have not been as bright. I'll start on the defensive side, and then we'll get to the offense, and then we'll get into some coaching and individual players before previewing the Texans game and get you out of here. On the defensive side, the run defense especially, I feel like has been the number one Achilles heel for this defense. Outside of that, this defense not bad, especially with the injuries they've suffered, especially in the secondary. Why has the run game struggled? I mean, people mentioned Marquand McCall getting released and not replacing him, asking Shy Tuttle to be a true nose tackle, which is not really his position. Why has the run game, particularly on defense, struggled?
I think that you just hit on some good points. The linebacker play, Frankie Louvu is a really good NFL linebacker by my judgment, and Kamu Grugier-Hill is another situational player, very good on special teams, is a good tackler. But due to Shaq Thompson's situation and the fact that they don't really have, I'm not saying you need a Luke Kuechly all the time, but you need someone that resembles that type of just lateral quickness that's always around the ball on every single play, and it brings a lot of leadership, and I haven't seen that from the Panthers so far this season. So, I mean, you hit on the first reasons with just the interior of their defensive front having some question marks, but I think on top of that, the guys that are right behind those players at the second level have left a little bit to be desired, and this is going on a few years now with linebacker play for the Panthers being a problem. So I would point at those reasons why the run defense has struggled a bit.
Yeah. On offense, there are a multitude things I could say, but we'll just hit with the main things. Lack of receiver separation outside of Thielen has been lacking. The zone scheme running the ball as opposed to the power run game that we saw last year under Steve Wilkes. And then you mentioned Corbett at right guard, and Young learning on the fly as a rookie quarterback. But Bryce has been improving each game, as we saw in the Dolphins game, his best overall game as a Panther so far. So I'll just phrase the question positively on offense instead of just highlighting those negatives. What's the key to a post-bye improvement on the offensive side of the football and beyond as the last 11 games go?
As much as I love Bryce Young, he's got to get rid of the football quicker. And what you saw in the Seattle game from Andy Dalton would be the best example of that. Bryce Young has to be the quarterback, and make no mistake, he needs to be out there, and Andy Dalton would be the first to tell you that. But I hope that Andy is in his ear saying, did you see how quickly I got rid of the ball against Seattle? We have offensive linemen. We have undrafted offensive linemen that are starting in front of you. We don't have a guy that can blow off the top of the defense. You've got to get rid of the football quicker. And Bryce holds on to the ball a little bit long, at least for me. And in that last game against the Dolphins in the first half, especially in that first quarter, he was doing that. And he was taking underneath throws to Adam Thielen, and he was letting Thielen do something with his legs. And I think that's what he's going to have to do. He's going to have to get the ball to Laviska Shenault. He's going to have to get the ball to Miles Sanders when he comes back. He's going to need to develop Jonathan Mingo more than we've seen so far. If Terrace Marshall is ever going to be of service to you, which is a big if, you need to find out, get that guy the football. Go. I mean, to me, Ryan, right now, with the record being 0-6, if you see there's one-on-run coverage with Terrace Marshall, throw him the football. See what you got with this guy. See if he can make a play. I mean, I think that's the big thing, is just they need to get rid of the football as quickly as they can. And that, to me, is the key to their success.
I've been on this podcast saying that I think Terrace Marshall Jr., despite the trade stuff we've seen, is a great football player who's had some bad luck so far. And you call it injuries, scheme, drops, whatever you want to call it. with back to Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase at LSU, he was the guy with Joe Burrow. And then he got injured, and then the other two kind of stepped up a little bit. If people may not recall that, but yes, not a lot of time to go into a deep dive of Terrence Marshall, but yes, I would agree. Someone who
and if he's going to be worth anything to you, Ryan, either as a player or in a trade,
you got to see what you
use
have.
him.
Yeah. Chuba and Miles Sanders on the running back. Do you think it's going to be by committee going forward? We might see that after Miles comes back. Chuba really decisive power running in this Miami game, it looks like. And then we saw a little bit of Miles in the Vikings game, the Lion game, where, you saw him on those swing passes, those screens that he used a lot in Philly. Will this be a running back by committee?
I'm fine with that. And I mean, if you look at, I know it didn't shape up for the Dolphins on Sunday night, but if you look at before he got injured, Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert for the Dolphins, I mean, the most effective running game so far in the NFL this year has utilized two guys in the backfield. And I think that's the secret to success in today's NFL, is having multiple guys that you can rely on back there. So yes, I mean, if the game's on the line, then I want a healthy Miles Sanders in the game.
Sure.
But healthy being the key.
And that's, you're right. And I don't think he's been healthy so far.
No, he hasn't. But if he is, then I want him in the game. If he isn't, then I do think it's a little bit by committee. But regardless of Miles's health, yes, there needs to be series for Chuba Hubbard moving forward. He's a guy that can catch balls out of the backfield. He picks up blitzes, and he can run. Like you said, he's a powerful running back that can do everything for you. Maybe doesn't have the same talent level that Miles Sanders has, but he's capable enough to play 10 to 15 snaps a game.
Yeah, we saw a marked improvement, I think, this year from him as opposed to maybe his rookie year. Injuries have been a big factor with this team. Two-part question. Number one, what players could the Panthers see back this week? I'm talking Corbett, Xavier Woods, J.C. Horn, maybe Miles Sanders. That's part one. And then part two, I know you can't answer this question, but best theory that you got going. Why have the injuries been taking such a toll this year? Why have they been happening, it seems, so frequently? Is that just a Panther thing, or has that been an NFL thing this year, you think? I mean, there's the turf grass debate, but we don't have to get into that.
Yeah, I don't think that it's anything that I just think it's fluky, to be honest with you. I don't think that it's anything other than that. But I will say I am a huge advocate of using natural grass or a hybrid type of grass that I know Mr. Tepper is a big fan of. If that is shown to have the same exact sort of performance that natural grass does, I'd be totally fine with them using that. I know they have it on their practice field in Charlotte. But I'm not a fan of artificial surface. And I think we're seeing way too many injuries from it. I realize the financial cost that comes with that, but I certainly would love to see natural grass or something that's more effective. If Austin Corbett, to your injury thing, I'll just start with Austin Corbett. If Austin Corbett comes back this week or whenever he gets activated, that is the biggest addition to me that the Panthers could have to shore up that offensive front. Corbett is a really good offensive lineman in the NFL, and that knee injury last year has taken a lot of time for him to come back from. So if he's activated this week, that could be very effective. I sort of get the sense that he is going to come back this week, and that'd be very good news. Some of the other guys that you talked about, I don't know the latest with J.C. Horn. You would have to tell me that. But that's another one. You know, like we talked about earlier, he has not played much football in the last 2+ seasons, and I think he's a shutdown NFL corner, and I think he'll prove that once he's out on the football field. I think in the glimpses we've seen, you can see examples of that, but I have not heard the latest on him, Ryan.
It looks like he has an appointment later this week, so we'll see what happens with that. And I think Frank Reich was going to get an update on him and Xavier Woods, particularly on Wednesday. He said he did not want to give an update until Wednesday. So we'll see kind of what happens on that front.
Fingers crossed.
Yes. And then Miles Sanders coming back, and then maybe Von Bell as well to pair with Xavier Woods. Von Bell, stayed healthy most of the 6 games, and then he just all of a sudden missed the Miami game. And at least me, it seemed like it popped up. But he's another guy that I feel like would
Another
be
great
good
leader
leadership.
too, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, another guy, I mean, he's kind of, to me, he's kind of the Adam Thielen of the defense.
Yeah.
He's a guy that commands a whole lot of respect in the locker room, and he's wise beyond his years. He's played a whole lot of meaningful football. So it's not just the talent, it's just also the experience and knowing what to do on the field. And he knows what everybody else should do on the field. You need as many as those guys as you can have as possible with a young football team.
Yeah. Let's get into some trade rumors really quick. This will be a brief question. It was said, at least by Joe Person of The Athletic, who is a friend of this podcast as well. He said it looks like the Panthers might be trying to trade for a receiver. And then otherwise, there might be sellers at the deadline other than that. One, is this a good idea? And then number two, we've heard names like Jimmy Chin, Terrence Marshall, and Dante Jackson being brought up. And it came out that the Panthers gave Marshall a permission to seek a trade. And obviously Burns has also come up. I don't get the sense that they're going to trade him, but that's just my reading in between the lines. But so thoughts on anybody getting traded, and then also is it a good idea to get a wide receiver here at the trade deadline?
I'm going to start by answering this. So you mentioned all the golf work that I do. I was in Scottsdale, Arizona last February for the Waste Management Phoenix Open while the Super Bowl was going on. And I bumped into Christian McCaffrey and Sam Darnold while I was there. And Christian McCaffrey came up to me and he was like, God, just seeing you makes me miss Charlotte. He's like, that town means the world to me. And I said, we were brokenhearted when you left. What an incredible player and guy he is. He's like, you know what, though? I totally got why they did it. Like, I mean, it made sense to get all the draft picks they could get. And now he's in an incredible situation. And what a guy to be able to say that, by the way. CMC, it's impossible to cheer against that guy. I would do the same thing if I'm the Panthers right now that they did with McCaffrey last year. If it means Brian Burns, so be it. If it means Jeremy Chin, if it means Shaq Thompson, if it means Derek Brown, if it means one of those guys that you can get a stockpile of picks for, do it. I know that the Panthers are tired of starting over, but this is a first year administration, if you will. It's not the coaching staff that you had last year. And this is a coaching staff and a team that's trying to build from the ground up. And I think it's really important to do it the right way. If you look at the best teams in the NFL right now, that's what the Philadelphia Eagles did, and they did it at the line of scrimmage. It's what the San Francisco 49ers did in a very similar way. It's what the Chiefs did. The Dolphins were the worst team in the NFL 3-4 years ago. Look where they are now. And they've done that through the draft and a couple of free agent signings. Jacksonville's an example of that, who had to start over 100 times. And it looks like they finally are making inroads there as a playoff team last year and a team that looks like they're primed to go back this year. I think that that's the same thing the Panthers have to do. Because they gave up that DJ Moore pick and gave up their pick for next year, I think that if they can get some more picks in the draft, this is a team that's going to hopefully end up winning 5 or 6 games at the end of the year. But if they can get back into the first round and get another significant player, I would do it. And if it means saving money in order to do it and sign another couple of free agents next year, so be it. Ideally, Ryan, I would rather sign Brian Burns to a long-term contract.
Sure.
But given what happened in the last 6 months, I'm not so sure that that's realistic. And if it isn't realistic, make sure you get something for him in return.
Yeah. Well, we'll just have to see kind of where it goes down the pike. And then the wide receiver one, it sounds like you don't think that's a good idea.
No. Well,
I mean,
I would love
Yeah.
I would love for the Panthers to have a number one wide receiver. I don't want to trade. I don't want to give up a draft pick. I don't want to give up assets to get a guy unless you are tethered to that guy for a long time.
Sure.
I would rather trade one of your best players now who you don't think is going to be with this franchise for long, like McCaffrey last year. I would like to do the same thing with one of their best players this year and get that player in the draft or via free agency in the offseason. it does. The only hesitation I have is I think the reason why we've seen so much struggle for Bryce Young is the receivers are not getting separation from defensive backs down the field, and it's made Bryce hold on to the football too long.
Yep.
But I would like to see him grow and check it down this year and maybe force the ball to Mingo a time or two. And if he throws an interception, so be it, and get that guy in the offseason. But it's a tough position to be in.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about Brian Burns and his contract, and if not, do they slap the franchise tag on him this offseason? But it sounds like you've kind of answered my question there from that goes.
I love him. I think he's an impactful pass rusher in the NFL, but I think it depends on what you can get in return.
Yeah.
If you can get a pile of picks in return, similar to what you can get from McCaffrey, probably can't get as much as you can get from CMC. But if you can get a significant amount of value in return, I certainly would explore it. But if you can't, then yeah, I probably would do what you just said, and I would franchise him and bring him back. You got to get to the quarterback, and he's your best bet of doing so. But I will tell you, like, I'm sure you do the same thing. Like watching Hassan Reddick ball out on Sunday Night Football, it's just, so hard to watch.
We're not going to go down that road for our sanities right now tonight. Let's get into this coaching staff real quick, and then we'll get some predictions going down the stretch and get you out of here. Frank Reich has given up play calling to Thomas Brown. That was done this bye week. He has said this, even when he got hired, Thomas Brown would call the plays at some point. Thoughts on the move, and what kind of play caller is Thomas Brown?
I don't have any idea because he hasn't done it. He's done it maybe a time or two in his life, but he's always been more of a, like in the college, he was a great recruiter and a good position coach.
Yeah.
And then obviously for the Rams, he was the same thing. I would guess that there's some Sean McVay in him.
Yeah.
I would, he was Mark Richt's offensive coordinator at Miami.
Yeah. He's got a little bit of experience, but it's still college.
Yeah. He at Georgia, he was a position coach, and he got some valuable experience with one of the more talented rosters in college football. But I would think because of his NFL experience with McVay and the Rams, that you would see that have an impact on him. But I would also say this: Frank Reich, Josh McCown, Andy Dalton, and Bryce Young are all going to have an impact on the way Thomas Brown calls the game. Thomas is not the kind of guy that's going to be so stubborn and say, this is the play. It's going to be a collaborative effort. He's going to be calling plays from a sheet on Sundays, but I know that throughout the week, it'll be a collaborative effort. So I think that he's going to try to put Bryce in the best position to be successful, but I hope that while he's calling these plays, he encourages Bryce to get the football out of his hand very quickly. I'm fascinated to see the kind of job that he's going to do. The other guy that certainly will have a say in this is Jim Caldwell. That's the whole reason they brought Jim in, is on Mondays and Tuesdays. I'm sure he's going to have a lot to say to Thomas Brown.
Yeah. This coaching staff specifically, were Panther fans' expectations too high to start the season? Or do they, with the rookie quarterback, new receiving core, new coordinators, new head coach? You mentioned, and the schedule as well, very tough. This is not the same team as last year. The offensive line overachieved a little bit, a different running style. And, the whole coaching staff, like I said, is new. Were fans' expectations wrong, or were we just underestimating how much of a learning curve Bryce Young was going to have as a rookie quarterback, because they all go through it?
Great question. So, yes, the expectations were too high, but self-included. And you hit on it. Because of what we saw from the offensive line in the Wilkes era towards the end of the season, I really thought that offensive line would be able to protect Bryce Young. Now, that I didn't realize Austin Corbett would miss 6 games this year.
Yeah.
That was assuming that he would be back at the start of the season and he wouldn't miss as much time as he's missed. So that's one thing. The other thing is when I thought about the Panthers being a potential contender and what most of us believe to be the weakest or one of the weakest divisions in the NFL, I didn't look at just how difficult the schedule was going to be the first 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Having said that, in the preseason, I still thought they'd be about 2-4 right now, not 0-6. But yeah, I mean, it's been a steep learning curve. The inability for receivers to get open down the field, the inability to really protect Bryce Young up front and run the football effectively, Miles Sanders not being totally healthy,
Yeah.
and the schedule. You put all that together, and it's been much more challenging than I think most of us would have imagined. But having said that, I'm still betting on the Panthers
Yep.
playing about 500 football from here. And that's based off of what I saw them do against the Dolphins last week.
Yeah. Off the beaten path question, really quick as we wind down. Being around the team that you are and some of the insight that you've had, what's one thing, whether it's fans, followers of the Panthers, the media, good or bad, that we're not talking about enough? Like something that's very underrated. Good or bad. What are we not talking about enough?
I think the administration cares deeply. The organization cares deeply about the fan. Mr. Tepper and his wife Nicole are front facing quite a bit, but the other people behind the scenes are working their tails off to try to bring a winner to Charlotte. And I think that just having the kind of opportunities that I get in the preseason to be around those people makes you realize, all right, this franchise does have a lot of people, a lot of new people, I might add, in the last couple of years that are here for a reason. And when you're around them, you'd be impressed. And being around as many different football programs as I am at the collegiate level and to some degree the professional level, I think that you'd be impressed by that. So just, I guess that would be one thing that I noticed. Their marketing team is terrific. Their front office does a good job. Scott Fitterer is a very hardworking man that whose scouting department is all there for a reason. So I've been pretty impressed by them. Again, a lot of these guys have not been in Charlotte for more than a handful of years. And prior to them, you had a army of people that had worked for the Panthers since its inception. There are a lot of new faces that have come to work for the Panthers in the last few years that have done a good job.
Last three really quick, and we'll get you out of here. What is the main thing we need to do to come out with a victory against the Texans on Sunday for our first
Get rid of the football quickly, period. Get rid of the football quickly.
Okay. Main goal the rest of the season for these last 11 games with Bryce Young. Is it the development of Bryce Young and that's it? Or what else? Or is that it? Or is that just it?
No, I think that that's part of it. I think that winning football games is very important. I think that a lot of people say, well, there's so much time, 8-9 months between seasons. If the Panthers finish the season 5-6 or 6-5 in this last 11 games, I think that would be something that's rather significant going into next year, is the way that they play these games. If they beat Houston and or Indianapolis with Gardner Minshew and or the Bears, then all of a sudden you could say, okay, if they win 2 or 3 of those games, then they've got some momentum. If they were to beat a playoff team like the Dallas Cowboys, or if later in the year they beat, say, Tampa or Atlanta with
Jacksonville,
when those teams are playing for the division title, or like you said, at Jacksonville in the second to last week, if they can get one of those games or a couple of those games, I think that would go a long way in the future development of this franchise.
And then lastly, what is your prediction for the rest of the season? If you had to give a record, what would you say our overall record would be?
All right, let's see here. I'm going to say that they have I'm going to say that they go 5-6 the rest of the way. So I'm going to say that they're 5-12.
5-12. Okay.
I know that's a record that people have gotten quite familiar with in the last few years. But if you do it the way that they did it this year, I think there would be more hope and optimism going into the following year than there typically has been. So that's where I'm going to say that they end up.
All right. That's a good way to end it. As I said at the top, my guest today has been Taylor Zarzour, preseason TV voice of the Carolina Panthers alongside Steve Smith, SEC Network for college football and college baseball and golf as well. Taylor, all the best. Great to have you here on Inside the Vault. And anything else you want to plug since we have you on?
No, all good, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome. And it's so good to see you. And
You
that
too, man.
will wrap up this edition of Inside the Vault, episode number 16. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And we will see you next time.